Quise hacer esta entrada más para opinar, que me dieron ganas. Em, Ahorita está, pues son cuestión muy mediática, ¿no? Lo de los mineros atrapados. Y la verdad es que Laura Velázquez me cae bien, es la persona encargada de protección civil. Y se ve pues una persona ahí genuina, ¿no? Lo que pasa es que al principio, hace una semana que empezó todo esto, los mineros atrapados en Coahuila, y ella comentaba, sí estamos trabajando mano a mano, estamos atendiendo, ¿no? Sí, todos unidos, juntos, sí, qué
It is the
bonito
result
todo.
of organic matter
Y ahorita,
transforming into hydrocarbons
¿de quién
over
pasó
millions
los
of
10?
years. Generally
Pues como
buried in
que
the
ya
form of a
le
deposit,
golpeó la
crude
realidad.
oil sometimes
O
appears on the
sea,
surface of the
obviamente.
earth, which is why it has been known to man since ancient times. Around the world, oil
Estoy
was
seguro que
used
ella ha
as sealing
afrontado pues,
material in
otras
construction and for medical purposes.
tragedias o
But it is
ha
only in the middle
afrontado
of the
otras
19th
emergencias de
century
este tipo,
that its
¿no?
consumption would explode.
Pero ya se ve que le está pegando la realidad, no tanto de lo que
Europe
está
and
pasando
North
en Coahuila,
America,
sino
in
la
the midst
realidad
of
y de
industrial
tener
revolution, have
que
rapidly
estar
increasing
frente a
energy
las
requirements
cámaras todos
that
los
are met
días,
mainly by coal.
todos los
Interest
días,
in oil
rendirle
intensifies
cuentas
throughout the
a la
world.
gente,
From the
que
Russian
todos los
Empire
días
to Europe to North
hay
America, the first modern drilling
videoconferencia
location. In the United States,
dentro de la
this
conferencia del
causes a
mañana del
rush of
presidente
black
con ella
gold, and the
y ya
country
se le ve un
becomes the
semblante muy
largest oil
diferente.
producer in the world. Initially,
Digo,
distilled
hasta
oil
yo que no
replaces the
soy
burning
experto en
of whale
estructura
oil
ni
in lamps.
nada de esto,
It offers a better
pero
calorific value than coal and is easier to
era como que
transport
obvio.
than
Yo
gas.
pienso, bueno,
Oil
sí están
consumption
trabajando,
rises
están
in the
sacando
early
el agua y qué
20th
chido está
century,
pensando ella.
especially in the field of
Y si
transport,
piensan
with
aquí
the
les hacen
development
caso,
of the
porque
automobile,
parece
the
que
reconversion
están
of ship
tomando
engines,
decisiones más
and the
presionados por
aviation
los
boom
medios de
during World
comunicación
War I.
que por lo que se debe hacer técnicamente.
Crude
Quitaron
oil,
unos
once
polines.
extracted, is
Yo no
distilled in
sé
a
si esa fue
refinery
la
to
parte que
separate
se
the
cayó.
hydrocarbons as needed.
Obviamente que
The lighter
mientras ellos están
molecules
sacando
evaporate
agua,
to the top of the
están
distillation
bombeando
column,
para
where the
afuera, para afuera,
temperature
para
is
afuera.
around 20 degrees
Ahí todos son
Celsius.
ríos subterráneos.
Liquefied
El agua
petroleum
sigue quedando
gases
por
are
otras
harvested
partes.
and
Entonces
used,
tienen que
among other
sacar
things,
agua
in
a
lighters
un
and in
régimen
kitchens.
mayor,
Between
hacia una
30 and
velocidad mayor
105
de la
degrees
que está
Celsius,
entrando.
gasoline for
¿Qué
cars
va a
is
pasar
produced.
cuando dejan
Between
todo eso seco?
105 and
Hay una
160
diferencia de
degrees
presión
Celsius,
entre,
naphtha is
porque el agua que
created,
está ahí
used in petrochemicals
está
in order
teniendo
to create
paredes
plastics, synthetic textiles,
para que
drugs,
otros
and
vasos que
cosmetics.
están ahí
Between
mismo,
160
digamos,
and 230
sosteniéndose
degrees Celsius,
con
kerosene is obtained
otros,
for
digamos,
aviation. Between
recipientes subterráneos,
230 and 425 degrees Celsius,
pues
diesel is
no se
created for
derrumbe.
cars and heating oil
Entonces,
for domestic purposes.
tú tienes,
Finally, the thick,
bueno,
high sulfur residue is
tienes
heated to
aquí
about
una
450
pared así.
degrees Celsius to form heavy
De este
fuel
lado
oil
tienes
used by
agua,
ships and
de
to
este
obtain
lado
bitumen used for road
sacas el
construction
agua de
and
este lado,
roofing. Crude
sale
oil
el agua
was
de este lado.
transported in barrels with a capacity of 42
Vale,
US
o
gallons,
sea,
or slightly less
eso
than
es
159
cuestión de
liters.
lógica.
The barrel thus became the
Claro,
unit for
está
setting
cabrón,
oil
los de ahí
prices.
no han podido explorar,
More
pero
and
para
more
que,
oil
no,
deposit
en
discoveries
las
are
próximas
made
unas
worldwide,
horas vamos a
including
estar
in
allá
Venezuela,
y el
which becomes the
presidente ya
second
haciéndoles caso.
largest global producer. In the
Lo del
Middle
Chueco
East, where
también,
Britain is
allá en
present,
atrás del Chueco,
Western companies
Chihuahua.
seize the new market,
¿Y qué
giving
más
a
son los
portion of
jesuitas?
their profits to the local country through royalties. During World War II,
Ese güey
demand
nunca
for
lo van a
oil
encontrar
skyrockets,
mientras sigan
and the
compartiendo
resource becomes a
información
major
con el
international
gobierno
issue.
del Estado
At the end of the war,
y
the
con la
United
Fiscalia
States
estatal.
signs an
No
alliance
lo
with
van a
Saudi
encontrar.
Arabia, guaranteeing
Incluso hará
security of the
falta
country in
si siguen
return for
compartiendo
privileged
información,
access to
no
its
sé si
oil.
siguen compartiendo información con, o si estén compartiendo con la
Western
Fiscalia,
companies dominating oil markets contribute to nationalist movements in
pero a
producing
ese güey no lo
countries.
van a encontrar.
In Saudi Arabia, an agreement is signed
obviamente
allowing
lo
the
están
country to
moviendo.
receive 50% of oil profits.
Pero sí,
In Iran, negotiations with the
detrás de él,
Anglo-Persian oil
horas o
company
días,
fail,
no sé.
following which the Prime Minister
Pues mientras sigan
nationalizes the country's oil.
compartiendo
In
información
response,
con el
the
gobierno
US
del
and the
Estado,
UK
autocratos,
secretly organize a coup to
no puede
overthrow
hacer
the
nada.
Prime Minister. The Shah of Iran
En
remains in
Chihuahua,
power and then allows the
de
exploitation
alguna
of oil
manera
in the
todos
country by a
más o
consortium
menos
of Western
conocemos.
companies.
Pero
In the
Fiscalia
USSR, the discovery
tiene
of oil fields
casi
in
1 millón
western
de
Siberia
habitantes y Ciudad
pushes the
Juárez
country to
tiene más
invest
de
in its
1,5 millones.
exploitation.
Por lo menos en la capital y en
Plentiful and cheap oil
otras zonas,
overtakes
pues,
coal to
es
become the
gente que más o
primary
menos
source of energy in the world.
conocemos
So far,
y
its
que,
price remains
sobre
below
todo ahí en la
$3
sierra,
a barrel. 5 major oil-producing countries
yo estoy
decide to
seguro que hay
unite to derive
muchísima
more
gente que sabe
benefits.
dónde está
They create OPEC, the Organization of
guardarse calor
Petroleum
y que le
Exporting
llevan
Countries.
comida, que le
Together,
llevan
they want to
bebida y que
counter
le
the
llevan sus
dominance of
pistos,
Western
que le llevan su
companies,
droga y
to
que le llevan
increase oil
todo lo que
prices, and
consumes.
to have a common policy.
Entonces,
The organization
pueden
would
capturar
gradually
toda
be
su
joined
familia
by new
y
nations.
nunca van a saber
In
dónde están. Si
1972, the
siguen
United
combatiendo el
States
pueblo.
reaches peak production and is
Eso es
forced
obvio.
to import oil to
Hace
meet its
más
increasing
de 2
needs.
años, yo creo,
As the
que
United
hizo una
Kingdom
entrada
withdraws from the
donde
Middle
decía
East, security in the region is
esta
provided by
gente,
Iran and
no
Saudi
tal vez
Arabia,
menos
which
de
are armed by
2
the
años,
West.
no me acuerdo, que esta gente agarran redes,
After the
se
Yom
están
Kippur
haciendo
War between
pendejos con lo
Israel
del
and the
internet
Arab
para
states of
todos.
Egypt, Syria, and Jordan,
O
OPEC
sea,
for the first time
obviamente
uses oil
apenas
as a
nos estamos
political
dando
weapon.
cuenta
An
estas
oil
semanas
embargo is imposed
que
on
el
Israel's
presidente no
allies,
estaba bien
and
enterado
production slows
pues, de
to
cómo está el
inflate the
asunto,
price of oil. This is the
de que
first
no se
oil
pueda poner
crisis
en
which
una
hits
empresa
industrialized
del
countries
Estado
whose economies now
para
depend on the black
proveer
gold.
internet gratis,
Countries try to reduce their oil consumption
porque
and
se
invest in
independicen
alternatives
en
such
ti,
as nuclear
Telcel,
and hydropower or
Avantel o
reinvest in
MCI
coal.
si existen
Oil
todavía
companies, in
donde
turn,
está de todos
explore the
esos
world
güeyes.
in search of new
Y
deposits.
la Comisión
Sources
Federal
at
de
sea,
Competencia
called
no
offshore
lo va a
sites,
dejar.
are discovered and exploited, particularly
Entonces
in the North
solamente
Sea.
puede llevar internet
The
a
Soviet
donde no
Union
existe,
becomes the
a donde
largest
no hay.
producer of oil in the world,
Ahora,
while in the United States,
lo
production
más difícil ya
increases
está
with
hecho,
the exploitation of
porque ya está la
Alaskan
pinche
oil.
fibra óptica.
In
Tú
1979,
ves
the
todas las
Iranian
líneas de
Revolution
transmisión
takes
de
place. The
alta,
Shah's regime is
de
overthrown
alto
and
voltaje,
replaced by an Islamic
las líneas
republic
de
that
distribución,
sets up an
LCP,
anti-Western policy.
por ahí va
Oil
la pinche
production in the
fibra
country
óptica,
falls, causing
va
the
en el
second
cable
oil crisis.
del para rayos.
Following border
Adentro de
disputes,
ese cable.
tensions between Iran and Iraq lead to 8 years of war.
Nosotros tenemos energía
Globally,
fácil. Siempre ves tú
non-OPEC
que
oil
va
production
4
rises
cables
and exceeds production by OPEC countries.
en uno de esos
Henceforth,
cables está
supply
hueco
and
y adentro
demand
va la
sets the
fibra
price for
gris.
a barrel rather
Entonces
than
todo eso
OPEC.
ya se hizo hace
However,
años.
for
Ahí
industrialized
está la
countries,
pinche
the
fibra
stability of the Middle East still remains a priority. Thus, when Iraq
Obviamente
and
es
Iran begin to
muchísimo
target
trabajo
oil
el que se
facilities
tiene
in
que
the
hacer.
Persian
Una pinche
Gulf,
empresa que no
hundreds
sabe,
of
no lo
Western
hace
military
sola,
vessels
que puede ser
step
rápido,
in
pero
to
sí
ensure
necesita
the
mucha
supply
gente
of oil.
que sepamos
At the end of the
bien,
war, Iraq
¿verdad?
is weakened and indebted to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait.
Hacerlo,
But having
pero
received
también
large amounts of military
lo que pueden
equipment,
hacer,
the
espero que
country
lo
has the
hagan.
most powerful army in
Parece
the
que van a
region.
entrar los electricistas a
Iraq
hacerlo.
takes advantage of
Ellos
the
no son
situation to
expertos en
invade Kuwait
comunicaciones,
following a
pero
border
tienen
dispute.
equipo.
An international
Tienen
coalition is
algunos
formed under the
expertos,
UN and led by the
no
United
unos
States
cuantos.
to intervene and neutralize the Iraqi army.
Tienen el expertise de andarse trepando
This
y
time, the United States
preparando
establishes a permanent presence in the region by installing military bases and signing defense agreements with Gulf
Pero
monarchies.
lo que
The
podrían
country
hacer es
imposes a
incluso
series of
invitar a
embargoes against Iran
toda la
and
gente
Iraq,
que tenga
which
que
it considers
practicar
rogue states.
telecomunicaciones,
Saudi Arabia,
darles
for
un
its part,
sueldito
wants to
más o
once
menos
again become
decente.
a major producer of oil.
Y estoy
The
seguro
country
que
has the
hay
largest
mucha
known
gente
oil reserves in
que
the
se
world
otro
and
lado.
floods the market to become the
Aún
largest
se necesita.
producer of crude. In Russia, new investment
Se puede
revives the
hacer,
oil
se
industry.
puede hacer,
But as the
pero
price of
nada más
oil
que
is
lo
low
planean bien.
and offshore operations unprofitable,
Les
oil
paguen
companies
su
find
boleto
themselves in
y su
difficulty.
estancia allá,
In
y un
1998,
sueldito
they
ahí
begin
para
to merge
que no
together
gasten
and
nada,
combine forces.
que su
6
sueldo más o
giant
menos
oil
vaya
companies are
quedando
born
y
that would
aparte
become the
como
richest
servicio
and
social
most
lo
influential in the
traen.
world. In the
Y
Middle East, the military
pues van a
presence
dejar
of
ya
the
bien
United
capacitados
States
también
begins to raise concern.
en
On one
este
hand, radical
lo que es
Islamists do
transmisión por
not want the
radiofrecuencia,
presence of an Israeli ally
que
on their
aquí
soil.
hay
On the
en
other,
Cancún
some consider the sanctions imposed on Iraq and Iran
Quintana
as
Roo
too heavy.
en general. Hay mucha gente que sabe de eso bien.
On September 11,
Me gustaría
2001,
saber
the United
más de
States
eso,
becomes the target of a major terrorist attack on its
tanto
territory.
conocer.
15 of the
Se puede
19
hacer.
terrorists were Saudis,
Y es lo
raising grave
mismo de esto,
concerns.
de
The US
lo del Chueco.
actively seeks new
Estoy
sources
seguro,
to reduce oil
estoy
dependency on the
seguro de lo que
Saudis.
estoy diciendo.
In
Ahí está el
Africa,
pinche Chueco.
production accelerates after the discovery
Metiéndose
of
donde.
large offshore fields off the
La
Gulf
otra
of
cosa,
Guinea.
estos
In the
cabrones
Middle
que ya
East,
atacaban
the United
Oxus
States
es
invades
más
Iraq
raro que
under the
hayan
pretext
Oxus,
of its war
sí
against
cerraron,
weapons of
porque
mass
no
destruction.
sucedía.
A few years later, the
Yo vi lo
country's
del
oil
ataque en
will
la
be back
pizzería,
on the international
eso
market.
parece ser que
Iran, for
algunos
its part,
ataques
opens
son
its
para
market to new
atemorizar a la
rising
gente,
Asian powers such as China and
pero
India. The abundant
lo de los
supply of
Oxus
oil in the
me
world
parece que
stimulates the
es
economy. Growth
muy
skyrockets, mainly
repetido.
in emerging countries. In addition, Wall Street traders speculating on black gold push prices further upward. But the financial crisis of 2008 would cause a sharp drop in prices. Venezuela, over a few years, discovers it holds the largest known oil reserves in the world, putting it ahead of Saudi Arabia. With more global demand for oil, its price rises again. The unconventional exploitation of petroleum becomes profitable despite the difficulty in its pumping and treatment. Thus, in Canada and Venezuela, oil companies rely on the exploitation of huge oil sand deposits. As this thick bitumen is found near the Earth's surface, forests are raised to extract the oil. It is then transformed with more expensive, highly polluting techniques. While offshore now provides 30% of global production, oil companies try exploiting deeper deposits. In the Gulf of Mexico, an attempt to make the deepest borehole in the world fails, causing one of the world's worst-known oil spills. In the United States, improved technologies such as fracking now make it possible to pump shale oil, the reserves of which seem enormous. This oil is wedged between different layers of solid rock. A fluid is injected at high pressure to break the rock and release the black gold, which is then pumped. Numerous such reserves discovered in the United States cause the country's production to explode. The fact that the biggest oil consumer in the world becomes a bigger producer does not please its Saudi ally. Saudi Arabia then wants to make the production of unconventional oil unprofitable by dropping prices. To achieve this, Saudi Arabia persuades OPEC to flood the oil market. The price of the barrel drops, making oil production barely or sometimes not at all profitable. But the oil industry of the United States resists and continues to increase its production. With oil abundant and cheap, world consumption continues to rise and approaches 100 million barrels per day. Two-thirds of the oil used in the transportation industry is the main emitter of carbon dioxide. In the maritime sector, heavy fuel oil used by ships emits 3,500 times more sulfur than diesel fuel, causing severe air pollution. The United States and Europe react by creating zones where heavy fuel consumption is prohibited. Since the beginning of the modern era of oil, many oil spills cause major environmental damage, with the Niger Delta probably being the most affected region, with 60 years of oil spills largely ignored. Saudi Arabia undergoes its own policy changes, being faced in recent years with a large fiscal deficit. OPEC countries are forced to appeal to other producing countries to together try boosting the price of oil. This includes Russia, the second largest crude exporter in the world. The United States, in contrast, continues to increase production to keep prices low and to support growth and the economy. The country eventually becomes the largest oil producer in the world.